welcome everyone. Welcome to On Fire Online. We have a great guest today. As you can see, we have Peter Molnar from Obsidian Ridge Wine Company, or is it just Obsidian Wine Company?
It's Obsidian Wine Company.
But it's situated, your vineyards are actually on Obsidian Ridge, which is, that's kind of remarkable. And that's pretty high up there, right? I mean, that's not usual wine growing country, is it?
Yeah, we're 3,000 feet up on the youngest volcanic flow in Northern California. And it was still blowing up 10,000 years ago. We are on, and we took out at least 5,000 tons of obsidian just to plant the vineyard. So to our knowledge, there's not another site, another vineyard in the world like this. We also farm down in the Carneros. Our family planted a vineyard at the very edge of Napa Carneros almost 50 years ago, the last vineyard before it turns into the Salty Bay. So that's Poseidon Vineyard and Obsidian Ridge are the two estates that we planted, that we found. They were not vineyards at the time, and we have farmed those continuously throughout the decades. So we make our own wines, and we also make our own barrels. We use oak from the Tokai region, tightest grained oak that we know of in Europe, and so that's our story, and we're sticking to it.
So winemaking has been in your family for a long time. I mean, you pretty much grew up in the business, it sounds like.
Yeah, but not the way you would imagine. I mean, when our parents came here from Hungary in the 50s and the 60s, they came separately and married here. You know, I mean, California winemaking was pretty moribund after the Prohibition.
Right.
You know, there's not much going on. I mean, Paris tasting supposedly got everything going. That was 76. My parents and their friends who came over basically started investing in vineyards to make a living and help put us to school, all the rest of it. So that's how we got started. But yeah, I spent summers working in the vineyard. And we never made wine of our own. We grew grapes for mainly sparkling wine houses like Domaine Chandon and Mum.
Oh, that's cool, huh?
Wine bug bit deep.
Well, you must have grown very good grapes if you were selling to prestigious houses like that. Domaine Chandon.
Yes.
So,
yeah, right.
So I'm fascinated about your. Well, I'm fascinated about the whole thing, but let's start with the barrels.
Let's start with your hair.
Yeah. Let's not talk about Peter's hair. You went to Hungary as a very young man to be involved with this barrel company.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that at the time, but so I left college in 1990 in the June, and by August I moved to Budapest, where my family had come from, and I couldn't think of a more interesting place, fascinating time to go. I actually was involved with the privatization of the Hungarian wine industry. I helped build a winery. I started a negotiant company, and then through that whole kind of journey, and it was a journey, I ran across a great cooperage, which was the oldest continuing operating cooperage in the country, called Budapesti Kadar. And the way, I mean, I'll tell you the story how it happened. It gives you an idea of the time. Piero Antinori was building a winery in the southern part of Hungary. Federico Severini, old winemaker, well, he wasn't that old, but his family had been many generation winemakers in Tuscany, was the winemaker. I drove up in an old Soviet car called the Lada, with no phones and no appointment. And I drove into the winery, and he said, "Hey, now that you're here, come down the cellar." The electricity was out, so we walked down with candles, and he said, "Taste these 6 barrels. Tell me what you think." And I don't think I'd ever done a formal barrel tasting in my life at that point. And we just went from one to one. And as we were tasting, Federico explained to me, he goes, "Listen, this is totally fascinating. My uncles and family members before me all used Hungarian oak in Tuscany, but then it disappeared because of the war and communism and so forth." So he had actually bought a barrel from each of the existing cooperages in Hungary at the time, and tasted them. And one of them was really, really good. I really liked it a lot. It was from the Tokai region, the wine. And that started our barrel journey. We ended up getting involved with the cooperage. There were then 40 coopers together, and they were barely making it. They were, at that point when I first went, I remember they were building planter boxes for an Austrian garden supply company because that's how they could make a living, as all the big wineries had fallen out. Anyway, long story. Today we're 63 people. We have 2 facilities. We're the only cooperage that survived the transition, and we supply over 500 wineries in 20 countries.
Wow, crazy!
It's been a lot of fun.
That's super cool, huh?
Yeah, so, and I didn't know that Hungarian oak and Hungarian barrels were well known in the winemaking community. I mean, you always hear about French barrels and American barrels. I had no idea.
Let me tell you a funny anecdote. There's I have not read it myself, but there's supposedly a writing in the early 1900s where the supply of oak from then Austro-Hungary was cut off, and they couldn't get it in France for whatever reason. And I believe it was the cellar master of Chateau Margaux, or one of the chateaus. He said, "And now we are forced to use our own oak." Central European oak, Baltic oak to the north was always widely used throughout Europe. It's particularly soft in tannin, and it's quite aromatic for lots of physiological reasons. And there was a big trade of oak throughout Europe. And in fact, the village that we're in Tokai, so Tokai is with Burgundy, the 2 original appellations in Europe. There's a lot of argument about which one was first. But we have a written history of making barrels in our village that's 1,000 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's crazy.
So
that reminds me of, in Scotland, they age their whiskey a lot in barrels that originally had aged bourbon. And they bring them over from America and they like to age their Scotch. So the Scots like to say that bourbon exists just to prepare the barrels for aging Scotch.
That's been a triangulation trade for many years. In fact, we sell now 80 barrels a year to Irish distillers for whiskey. They make a very high-end called Method and Madness, where they're using distinctive oaks from around the world. So
speaking of oak, actually, I think last week, Chef or James, last week or 2 weeks ago, we were talking about alcohol. And we were discussing the oak, and we were discussing the wood and the different type of wood. So I'm really glad that, Peter, you're here, because maybe you can explain to us why the oak is so important. I mean, we know that it's super important, but like, what's the deal with the oak? I mean, is it just oak, or is it the wood that?
So how much time do you have?
Give me just.
Yeah, no, I'm joking. So let me explain. Let me use a quote that I had of a conversation with Dominique de Beauregard, who was a professor of enology in the University of Bordeaux and director of our research program between the cooperages. And he says, "Peter, it's very simple. There are 400 compounds in wine, and there are 400 compounds in oak. And when they come together, not only do you have now 800 compounds, but you have all the possibilities of all those molecules combining and making interesting and different tastes." So here's a short answer. You have the species of oak has different characteristics. The terroir of where that oak is grown, much like a vineyard. The seasoning, and I call this the biome of seasoning. We now know that there are hundreds of fungi and bacteria that will digest oak in the yard over 2-3 years. And the way I put it is it creates an umami of oak. You create a much richer mouthfeel through the seasoning. And then finally toasting. Everybody's done it. You take a slice of sourdough and you put it on light, medium, or high in your toaster, and you get 3 different flavors.
Sure.
So through the toasting process, which originally, you were just getting that barrel warm enough to bend the damn thing. But in fact, we control as much as possible using natural fire, the depth, the penetration, and the length, and the heat levels of barrel toasting, and we create different compounds. We can create caramel, we can create nutmeg, we can create sort of larger, not nutmeg, not so much, but toasty notes. Or we can even create burn characters if that's what you want. So going to your point with bourbon, they use a lot of burn characters.
So that's amazing, because basically when we talk about food and the nutrients and health, we talk about the synergetic action of molecules. And of course, I should have thought that it seems very logic that everything works the same way, and the bacteria and the wood and the congeners and the molecule in the wine, everything works in synergetic action. And that's the same and that's why connectivity is very important, and people need to understand connectivity. And that's not just into molecules, it's also humans. We react by energies, and it's not just, we need to have this connection thing. And right now what's happening with the COVID is we are completely losing our connections. And I think that's what's going to make us more sick than anything else. But it's a personal thing, huh?
Well, hopefully we can use some wine to reconnect when the time comes.
Hey, I mean, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is cool.
So are there other woods that have these properties, or is oak pretty much unique in how it reacts with wine?
No, so we actually also make barrels out of acacia wood, cherry wood, chestnut. All those are used. Often the fruit nuts like cherry and so forth, the few fruit woods rather, are often used for eau de vie.
That makes sense.
They can be used for wine. There are traditions of using acacia wood for wine and so forth. But oak is predominant. It still is. But I agree. It's to Olivier's point. It's not a formula. It's a synergy. Right. What we're looking for is really creating and discovering delicious things because they come together in a way that you don't even notice.
Right.
If you do notice it, you're probably not a great chef, and you're probably not a very careful winemaker. Right. I mean, you don't want to make it too salty, and you don't want to make it too oaky. The interesting thing for me is people talk about like, oh, I hate oak. Well, yes, you hate the oak that you tasted, because if you actually, the ones that were done correctly are delicious. They make wine. It's not like you can't make good wine without oak. You just can't make that kind of wine without oak. There are lots of other types of good wines. There's amphora and clay and, a bunch of different. But, if you think about it, oak is the most natural vessel you could ever make wine in.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I think it's one of the most ancient of the keepers, because before glass came and stuff like that, wood was amphoras and wood was the only thing that was available at this time.
Yeah.
And just by the way, when they age traditional balsamic vinegar, when they put it through the batteria of little barrels, they use a lot of those woods that you mentioned: acacia, cherry wood, lots of fruit woods that the vinegar goes through as it ages, and it takes a little something from each one, which I find fascinating.
And what it does also in that way is it's also like concentrating a sauce. You are losing the angel's share out of each day, some amount. And so the wine does become more intense just because you have less water. So there's a lot of very interesting things about that. There's the size of the barrel, the shape of the barrel, all those things.
Yeah. The balsamic makers too, they all have their own proprietary formula of what woods they use and in what order they use them. But almost always, when you see that set of 6 barrels, they almost always begin and end with oak, interestingly enough.
Yeah.
It goes through all the fruit woods in between, but it starts in oak, goes through all the fruit, and then ends up in oak. And that's the barrel that they ultimately bottle from, which is interesting.
My friend Federico Stellerini, when I visit him in Tuscany, he'll pull out the €50 bottle of little balsamic, which is like syrup.
Wow. I know, right?
That's an amazing process too.
It's not a business you go into to get rich quick, is it? Sort of like making good wine.
Yeah.
Even with slow.
When you're making a product that has to age for 40 or 50 years, you better have a day job.
Exactly.
So, tell us a little bit about Obsidian Ridge. That is very high up.
Yeah.
And is that unusual to grow wine at that height? I mean, I know there are certain places like in Germany, for example, where they grow up on the slopes, but I don't think they're that high.
No. So here's a statistic. 3% of the vineyards in California are over 1,000 feet in elevation.
Oh, interesting.
We are at 2,450 to 2,875, so almost 3,000 feet. So we are well below 1% of the vineyards in California, and worldwide, it's not very much as well. I helped put together 2 international symposia called the Elevation of Wine in 2007, 2010. We had people in from Argentina, from Europe, Switzerland, sections of France, northern Italy, and actually Australia. The region of Orange in Australia is at close to 1,000 meters. So yeah, it's very different. Look, the biggest difference is luminosity. So as you go up every 1,000 feet, you get about 3% more ultraviolet light. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but that means at 3,000 feet, you're almost at over 10% more ultraviolet light. Every biological creature wants to protect its seed, or its offspring. So what grape does, it builds a thicker skin around the grape seed and that's where all the phenolics are that go into wine. So you have very thick skins, lots of color. I mean, Obsidian Ridge, I swear to you, after about 4 or 5 days on the skins, you can paint your house with it. I mean, it is black. Wow. And so by extension, the ripening curve, the types of compounds you get are different and just frankly more intense in mountain atmospheres. Light has a lot to do with it.
So Peter, so the skins grow bigger because of the cold.
Oh no, because of the heat of the light. Because of the light, they react to the UV.
Right. So it's like those dried farm tomatoes you can find right now coming out. The early girls, they have a thick skin because they are not wet enough. Yep. So they need to keep that water, and they build an extra skin to retain the water, right? So
similar reaction, yes, but ours is reacting to the sunlight as opposed to the lack of water. Having said that, our berries at that elevation are really quite small. So the ratio of skin to liquid, like the early girls, is very high. So it's not, the early girls is a pretty good analogy, I actually say.
Now, does that...
The point, no, it's fine. The point is basically you have to understand that, and which is cool when we talk about people that are very interested in their food and stuff, is every plant and vegetables and contribute to the environment. And as we grow and we understand that, food is not just something that comes in a bag, and there's a life behind that. And we need to be very, very aware that all these artisan, winemaker, cheesemaker, all these people, it's a lot of work. And it's about watching and learning and empiric, and you learn and you make mistakes and you do the same thing again, and all of a sudden that things work and you don't know why. It is because it is nature is taking over. And I would say this is calling something like a quantum. It's something that you don't see. It's all the mysterious thing that life offers that we're going back to with all the craftsmanship that you can see in the beer making, the cheese making, and all this good stuff. Like Peter with his wine, I mean, he's inside the grapes. This is what's important. You want to go and observe and see what's happening and look at the grape. That means spending hours and hours and days and days and days. And, this is so the point is value that you offer as a craftsman. It's a lot of work. It's not just putting some stuff together. No, this is a lot of value. And then you spend your whole life, and then you give a product. And this is my product.
I would completely 100% agree with
100%.
you. 100%. When I started out, I used to think it was a 50-50 deal between the grower and the vineyard. You know, I think I'm down to 80-20, and in a couple of years it'd be 90-10. We have to make sure that the grapes are healthy and arrive in the winery in good shape. But if it's a tree that's growing in the forest for 125 years, or a vineyard that develops over 25 or 50 years, biology is running the show. And the more we have all these great laboratory analysis and techniques and ways of understanding it, but we never control it. We just pay attention. And and you know what? This shit is crazier than you imagine. Like, the more we learn, the crazier it is how intricate this whole system is. It's funny, my uncle, who was the one who really turned me on to wine in Hungary, he said, Peter, you know, you watch, the 21st century will be century of biology. Well, here we are, right, in a pandemic. Clearly, we've always been in biology, and maybe our culture has forgotten that. And the technology that we have has so much been used to, like, tweet and ping and play videos and all the rest of it, which is great, or I guess great. But I think what will be really the breakthrough is when we actually turn around and say, wait a minute, we've been living in this magical world of biology, which is around us all the time, most of the time with good effect, keeping us healthy. Now we're facing something where we're potentially very, very sick. So, but it's the same side, it's two sides of the same coin. And the work that we do in the vineyard and the forest, like you guys do in the kitchen or farmers do, is really, as you say, paying attention. These processes are very, very powerful, and they are continue to go. We may not be around on this earth forever, but biology certainly.
You guys know, I know, James, you know, but Peter, do you know someone named Carlos Castaneda?
Yeah, sure.
He's a writer, huge in America in the 60s. He was actually an ethnologue in 61, and then he wrote all this crazy book about Don Juan, right?
Yeah.
So I love those books. And one of the part that I really like is Carlos Castaneda asked Don Juan, how did he learn about the plants? And Don Juan said, well, they told me. And I love, because I know how much time they spend, because in the old days, you don't have to run and go. You just sit here and watch year after year after year, and you experiment. And that power, we don't have that anymore. So now we have microscopes, which we do not give us as much information, because we're missing out a bunch of connections. It's too molecule per molecule, where that's not the way it works. Another example is, I always tell how people that garlic is one of my favorite antibiotic. It's been used by, it's been published in books, and so many studies have been done in there. They know it works. It was in the pharmacy book, in the teaching of pharmacy, it's been removed, but in the 1900s and 1950s, it was in the book of pharmacy. They know it works. They are not sure exactly how. Now, I tell them, look, don't worry about it. It works, right? Yeah, but we want to know what. Okay, but it does work, right?
Yeah. Well, I also find the way that the grape protects itself, and the way that fruit and all kinds of plants have these methods of protecting themselves, whether it's from bugs or the sun or water or whatever it is. But that particular one is a really nice example of terroir. I mean, how growing in this place creates a whole different grape. Because if you grew that same grape 2,000 feet lower, it's a different animal, completely different animal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, everything is a response to that very specific location. It's also north facing. So in the fall, we get a lot less direct sunlight. It allows for a long, slow evolution of our wines. I mean, there's a million little things but it's, you know, I mean, let me give you an example. We all know it. When the sun comes around the corner and you move your chair underneath the umbrella, right? I mean, or you put a hat on. I mean, this is what grapes are rooted in the ground. They can't move, but they do put their hat on. I mean, it sounds simplistic, but it is in some ways. It's traceable what these plants will do. We have a blackberry bush as you drive in, right on the right-hand side, and I built these 2 pillars of obsidian as you walk in for the gate. And I know when that blackberry first starts to be ripe, we are a week away from harvesting the top of the vineyard.
Oh, yeah, right.
Because it's in a similar aspect, similar lack of sunlight, because it's in a shallow area, blah, blah, blah. So, things like that. It's, again, paying attention.
Well, it's interesting because we have all the science now that they didn't have 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. We have the ability, like Olivier says, to look in a microscope and analyze all this stuff chemically and biologically. And yet winemakers are still just out there listening to the grapes, still, aren't they? I mean, it's really almost like 1,000 years ago. You're still just paying attention to the rhythm of the season and the sun and what's going on in the field, more so than looking through a microscope.
Because there's stuff you can't explain. You have to have done that many times, and that feeling, you can't put words with that. There's no words. You have to have done it. Yeah. Your eyes recognize the color, and that's all. You can't tell someone how it is.
Peter, can you explain briefly what exactly is obsidian? I know we have a big chunk of it sitting behind the bar at César. It's Bill's favorite thing.
What is that? Oh, yeah.
Obsidian.
Oh, wow.
Piece. I have many. This is a small one. The biggest ones, by the way, are like the size of the front end of my pickup truck.
Wow.
It's pure silica. And it's glass. It's volcanic glass.
Oh.
And so when you, so here's some super cool stuff about obsidian. When you have an explosion, you typically have the gas, then the ash, and then the silica comes out at the end. It kind of bubbles out like taffy. And then it doesn't get thrown very far because it's very heavy and it's viscous, like molten. It is molten glass, and so typically it breaks up. It cools down and breaks up in that area. And these are just obsidian rocks that we find on the surface. We have millions of rocks like that, to be honest, over the 400 acre property now. But so that's what obsidian is. And this was still exploding 10,000 years ago. Native Americans settled in the Lake County Basin, Clear Lake Basin, probably 14,000 years ago. And they were the very top of the vineyard. We actually have an official surveyed Native American archaeological site. They were using that spot. It was the last flow before the Clear Lake Native Americans went over into today's Sonoma, Mendocino. And they traded with them. So actually, Clear Lake volcanics have been found all the way over to the east coast of the United States, traded 5,000 or 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. Yeah.
Wow. Very cool.
Incredible.
Yeah.
That mass, that viscous, slow-moving mass, is what we normally refer to as lava. Is that the lava?
It's a type of lava, yeah. I mean, it's most of what we consider lava is the really brittle, gray, black, kind of pingy sound. That's basalt. Ideally, not ideally, but typically, like when you think of what you walk across in Hawaii, the Big Island. But obsidian is often coexists with basalt, so not everywhere, but it's one of the volcanic. You got acidic tufa, rhyolitic tufa; those are ash complexes. But yeah, it's all, I think, technically lava.
Gives you an idea of the amount of heat that must generate to create that. I mean, that's
a lot of heat.
That's like 1 million blast furnaces. I mean,
if you think about, so we are over the Canocti volcanic shield. If you drive up to Calistoga and you look up and you see Mount St. Helena, from Mount St. Helena to Mount Canocti, which is about a 30-mile run, is called the Canocti volcanic shield. It's the youngest part of the Earth's surface in North America. It lies over the what's called the North Coast magma pocket. It is basically a candle flame over the crust. And that candle flame, the North Coast magma pocket, runs the geysers that are above Santa Rosa. That geyser that geothermal field is the largest producing geothermal field in the world. It produces enough power for 2 San Franciscos, or every house between Sacramento and Oregon, to give you an idea. So yes, that's a lot of energy. They started drilling for those. They started drilling, developing those in the 50s. There are now, I think, about 9 large power stations up there. And basically, they just pump water down, and the steam that's made runs the generators. Yeah. In fact, it's crazy. It's all right there.
And is that what would be considered an environmentally sustainable method of power?
Yeah, geothermal power. I mean, most of Iceland is on geothermal power. Interestingly, Nevada, because of the way that Nevada is a basin range, it's actually being stretched apart. There are many thin areas, the Earth's crust there. If it wasn't a question of distance, I think I read somewhere that Nevada could power much of the United States. It's a transmission question. But yeah, I mean, look, we're sitting on top of a thin crust, 2, 3 to 4, 5 miles on top of basically molten seas that are churning underneath us all the time.
Wow.
So
that's going to keep you awake at night, Peter. From now on.
I want to ask you a technical question.
Drink some Obsidian, Jim. It'll calm you down. It'll be a good use of geothermal power.
No. Hey, I was reading about something about pressing the wine, and there's different ways to press the wine, right?
Yeah.
So I was reading about how the wine was getting born in 1500 and 1600, how it was distributed between the poor and the rich. Basically, the wine that was full by the foot was for the rich people, and the one that was pressed after that, really pressed for the poor people, because there's more to it. So basically, what you get more delicate. So how do you deal with that today? I mean, how do you press lightly?
Yeah, so
like olive oil.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's so the finest cut is what's called free run, which is basically just from the weight of the grapes, whatever drips out. And then we essentially we still use a basket press, which is tipped on its side. So it's a round basket with holes. But today we have a big balloon inside that you can fill with air. And as the balloon presses up against the side of the basket at different pressures, you are pushing out less and less gentle compounds, right? So the free runs, it's the sweetest, purest juice, however you want to put it. As you press, you're going to get particularly more seed components going into the wine, and seeds are often harsher. So wines tend to be less wine.
Wow.
So then you have free run, first cut, second cut, third cut. Distillers do something similar. Olive oil, as you said, Jim, is very similar. So yeah, we don't use our feet.
Basically, it's interesting because
but we have more.
It's interesting because what in my cooking personally, what I don't like for health purposes is seed oils. So seed oil, they oxidize really fast. They are terrible food. They don't heat up properly, and they oxidize as soon as they're contacting air. So they are really damaging to the body. I can see why it would be damaged to wine. Now I'm making a correlation.
Yeah, it's possibly. I don't know if it's oxidative as much as it is just harsh. You just get when you eat.
It's an omega-6. There's a bunch of stuff in it.
Seed, it's not the real deal. So
yeah. So do the thick skins also allow the grapes to age a lot longer? I would think so. Wouldn't that be a
so there are the biggest antioxidant is really tannin. Seed tannin particularly, and also oak tannin. Oak tannin is a preservative, and tannin is a very long acid chain. It tends to, because it's so long and complex, it tends to break down very slowly. So
alkaloid, right?
Wines with a lot of tannins will have much more ageability, And so Cabernet, for example, has a lot of tannins as a varietal, but our wines have a lot of tannins because of both, interestingly, the drainage. There's a lot of gravel. The more root surface area you have, especially the fine roots, the very end of the roots, there's a correlation between the number of fine roots you have and the tannin in the grapes. Similarly to the grape skins because of the thickness. There's also anthocyanins, which are color compounds. That's what gives us color. Those are also preservatives, so that's why red wines typically age better than white wines.
Right.
So those are all preservatives.
That's where you find your resveratrol.
That's where you find your resveratrol. Exactly.
This is one of the most studied compound today. They keep discovering new use for it. It's pretty amazing stuff. Yes, absolutely.
It's really good for hair retention.
Right.
Really? That's what I've been missing all these years. Dang it! Now you tell me.
It's gone. It's all gone.
So does your Cabernet from Obsidian Ridge, do you tend to age it for a long time? I mean, what's the average? I mean,
the joke about bottle aging and how long is bottle aging in America? It's like 25 minutes, which is the average time between the store and the house. Look, the reality is that most people are drinking wines when they buy them. So we do work to make the wines a little softer when they're younger. In fact, it's not making it less quality. It's just there are ways, especially we take it off the skins. We don't soak it as much on the skins because we get great color. We press them off a little earlier. If we made the first wine for 21 days, 3 weeks. I mean, that wine is in 2048. It'll open up. I mean, it's just a monster. So that's one technique we have. But having said that, we just opened last year, I think, our first 16 vintages, and there wasn't a tired wine in the group. I think Obsidian, because of the tannin and the anthocyanins and phenolic concentration, is a 20, 30 year wine. I don't see why it wouldn't be.
That's interesting. And when you say 20, 30 years, you mean lying in a cellar in the bottles, or you don't mean in a barrel?
No, not bottle aging. We have it in barrel for 18 months, basically a year and a half, more or less. We have some of our reserve wines are 2 years. You lose over time. So barrel aging is a whole other topic, but you have to be careful not to overage in barrels. You will lose a certain amount of vitality in the wine.
Right. Because it's air.
Wine can handle that.
Yeah, it breathes. The oak breathes, so that's why the glass doesn't. And so the thing is, it's interesting. Alcohol does not age in the bottle. Wine does. So the alcohol has to be
spirits. You mean? Yeah.
The spirits, yeah. Spirit. You put the date where it was bottled because that's it. It was barreled old. The wine, it will keep aging. However, those are called in France vin de garde, which it's called a keep wine to drink early. So some wine are meant, they are undrinkable early. You can't drink them, right?
Yeah, we have a story that we've told on the show before, but it was about a customer at Cesar once, and I was talking to him about Macallan Scotch and how I used to love the 25-year-old Macallan that the guy I worked for always had it in the 80s, and whenever I was at his house, I always drank it, and it was just fabulous stuff. And I said, but you just can't get it anymore. And the oldest one we have now is, I think, 15, or even like a 12-year-old is more common. And the guy looked at me and he goes, well, if it's so good, why don't they just make more of it? And I said, that's the concept here. But yeah, when you put that scotch in a bottle, it's done. It doesn't age any further. So I find it fascinating that wine
it's so
continues to change if it's sitting in a cellar in a bottle of wine. That's fascinating how that can happen. Even stuff like champagne. I've had some really old champagnes before that you'd think it would be gone, but some of them have just been just amazing.
Yeah.
But champagne is hard to keep. I mean, when I worked at La Toc. When I was 20 years old, I worked in a very, very fancy restaurant in LA, which still exists today, La Toc, and they had those crazy old champagne, and people would come with 1961 champagne, Dom Perignon, and they say, "Can you open that?" I'm like, I don't want to open that. I don't want to be. And you could see that the thing was not. I would look at the color and it was very dark. I'm like, I don't know, man. It's like it might
Well,
be.
that's why I was so surprised.
And then I would open it. The cork would be dry and it would be yellow. And I'd say, "Don't drink that. It's not good. It's dead." They're like, "No, it's. Oh my God, it's so good." I'm like, "Okay, yeah." So champagne is hard to keep. You have to keep it really, really perfectly. It's like 15 years or I don't know, 20 for rare exception. But Bordeaux can last forever. I mean, Bordeaux, if it's well kept, you can open this crazy old bottle, and that's because of the tannin. The champagne doesn't have any tannin anymore, and those, like Peter was saying, the antioxidants, they do the same thing they do in food. They keep from bacterial activity, and that's exactly what happened, and from the fungi and stuff like this. And now in the food business, they're trying to incorporate more of the natural antioxidants like horseradish and anthocyanide, because they realize that that's the safest way to go, and that might be the oldest way. And when you look at olive oil, if the olive oil is dead, that's because there's no more antioxidants. But if the olive oil is super fresh, I can fry with it. That oil is going to keep its structure because there's so much antioxidant that it won't be destroyed by the heat, you see? So it's really, a good product is a good product forever, and that's what you put in there, definitely.
Well, speaking of good products, you also grow grapes in the Carneros region, as you said. Totally different. You're growing mostly Pinot Noir and Chardonnay down there, right?
That's right. So we farm the highest and the lowest vineyards in the North Coast. Poseidon Vineyard actually is below sea level at the south end. It was a wetlands hence the name. And they built a levee probably in the late 1800s. We have some old maps from 1852. There was no levee then, but the maps by 1890 have a levee. So anyway, the bottom sort of 20, 25 acres were once wetland. In fact, I was walking down there the other day, and if I go down, we're in the last half mile of Carneros Creek. I go down there and I taste the salt. In high tide, the Carneros Creek tastes of salt because no kidding. The bay tide comes up that high.
Wow.
So it's much different. It's clay. It has a lot of gravel that's come down through erosion from the Mayacamas mountains, but it's clay and gravel. And there's a lot of fog. Like that, our site has about 2 hours more fog than most of Carneros, Upper Carneros, where Highway 121 crosses between Napa and Sonoma. And fog is just great for acidity. It just, every time the temperature drops below around 50 degrees, it's basically like taking your grapes and putting them into the refrigerator. They stop metabolizing. And so during harvest season, the acidity retains at night. And that's really critical. So all great wine regions, they're either near the ocean, they're up high in elevation, or they're high in latitude. And that keeps the nights cool. And that's the trick to having longevity.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think, and I'm an expert on. Okay. Oh yeah, please.
This is my.
Oh wait, let me hold on.
So, this is our high tech. Hold on, can you read that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, this is basically what we call the ripening curve, right? This is harvest from here to here, the length, and this is the levels of acid and sugar. As harvest goes on, sugar accumulates, which we call primary fermentation, or primary ripening, basically sugar, and the acids tend to drop because they start breaking down. So in a warm climate where your nights are not cool, your sugars will go up fast and your acids will drop off, and you'll harvest here. If you have a cool climate at night because of either elevation or you're next to the ocean or you're high latitude, like Canada, then you get to harvest here, right? Your sugars accumulate more slowly and your acids break down more slowly. And this area here, that's the whole shooting match. That's where all of the other compounds get properly phenologically right. The tannins, anthocyanins, all these other compounds in the grapes that make wines complex. And when we mean complex, that means not simple. That they have length and color, and they're just good. I mean, that's it. So that's what we're really trying to pull off. That's why we go to elevation. That's where we go. We planted next to the bay. That's why if we had vineyards in Canada, they would do well, or Washington State, right? Because by the time September and October happens, the days are so short, but the nights are very cool.
So that's why the wine from Santa Barbara, which are cold at night, are very acidic and have a good balance, right? Like more like a French Rhône.
Yeah, well, exactly. And so that's why Bordeaux is right next to the ocean, the Atlantic. It's quite cool. And Burgundy is very high latitude. Burgundy is up in Canada by latitude measurements. So, those are two great examples.
Now, the weeks leading up to when you think you're going to harvest, are you out literally tasting the grapes and testing them to see where the sugar is and what the acid is? I mean, you're not just saying this is the date we harvest. You're out there determining.
Yeah.
What's it like?
So at this point, we know how each vineyard unfolds. We know the areas that are going to start to get ripe first, and then it just kind of goes. If that block, then this block, then this block. There's a pattern there. The intervals change depending on the temperatures and the climate during harvest. So about 2 weeks out, we start taking baseline samples. We go and we walk through. And we take a berry. We took a berry from the top of the cluster, middle cluster, bottom cluster, on the middle and the two ends of the vine. Then we walk 6 vines or 12 vines, and then we do the same thing on the opposite side of the row. Anyway, we get a Ziploc bag of grapes. We bring them in, we squeeze them, and we take the numbers. So we're looking at sugar. We're looking at acid primarily. And those give us our baselines, and then we'll follow those probably every week. Look, this is not unlike, it's sauteing and not baking, right? You can saute a little extra or a little short if you want, and it's okay. If you pull a souffle out of the oven too early, right, it doesn't work, or any kind of complex baking. So this is more so at some point, it's a little bit our decision. Like, do we want to have a slightly higher acid year, or we think the other parts of the vineyard are going to be more ripe? So we'll make decisions like that. So it's not based on just the numbers, but we do use numbers. Yeah.
That's why you're a winemaker. You actually make the wine, right? You're blending, you're making it. It's not just, you are in charge. You literally make your wine. Your wine is your signature.
Well, we do, as the French say, assemblage. We assemble wines, meaning we assemble different components from different parts of the vineyard. Exactly. We assemble different characters from different types of barrels and toasting and size. So assemblage is a good word for it, because the ingredients, yes, we have to make sure the ingredients are at the right stage, but then we can say,
little bit of that, a little bit more of this, less of this. So you are mixology, a grape mixology.
Without the mustache and the bow tie.
And the drinking problem. Well, I don't know.
No, yeah, I mean, we are taking components for sure and paying attention to those components. No,
every time I say that, Peter, I just want to, this show is about you. We've invited a lot of cool people. We had the we had Sue from Cowgirls Creamery. We had Tom from Semi Freddy. Those are all, they give their whole mind to their product. That's the idea. And my fear today with all this cheap food and this really crappy food that we have and fake food and all this food, so you don't have to eat that. So all this diet makes you all this gluten-free stuff. We are ending up with products that have no soul. And my fear is people are going to get used to that no soul food. And and us artisans, it takes forever to put together this business. I mean, wine business is years, is tens of years. Cheese, you don't open a cheese place like this. It's years of making, and finally you have a product, bread, all this. As if you want to make a protein powder, you go to whatever idiot and you get a formula and you do it. I'm not saying it's not good. I'm just saying the way we work as an artisan is very different. And that show is really to keep, I want to keep people understanding that we need to privilege craftsmanship, winemaker, cheesemaker, and all these people, because if once they're gone forever. There's no replacement. We can't just have another Peter Molnar. If you go, it's like it's a family business you had for hundreds of years. I want people to understand this is part of the tradition. It's old. We need to keep that going, and people need to understand that they need to buy from only small people right now and let go of those big corporations, and let's try to save the artisan craftsmanship and stuff. Anyway, so I get it.
Absolutely. Peter, what do you say to the old adage that wine is made in the vineyard? Is that more or less true as we've been talking about it? I mean, is that just a way oversimplified?
I think it's a statement. It's obvious on its face. Where else would it come from?
Right. I don't understand.
How else would you make it? Yes. I mean, primarily there's a lot of skill in the. It's not entirely true, but no matter how good a chef you are, you cannot make a great meal out of inferior products, and the same with grapes. So there's certainly a role for the winemaker and the vintner in the process. A lot of skill, paying attention, assembling. Like we talked about, assembling it correctly. Made in the vineyard, screwed up in the winery. That's the other one you hear. A lot of it is, to some extent, we talked about this with Alex, who's our winemaker. I take care of the vineyards, but I said, look, what do you think about our winemaking ethos? And he's like, I just want to make delicious wine.
Right.
I just want to make wine that tastes like the fruit that we get in the vineyard. I want it to be transparent, like you can taste through my winemaking to taste the vineyard. So yeah, I mean, but this is an age-old discussion. I think our ingenuity, our experience as people who make these things, as to Olivier's point, the craftsman is critical to this process. But it's not determinate. It's not the reason the wine's good.
Yeah, there's a multifactorial concept.
I mean,
I want to.
I think just on that note, I think the thing I like about that adage, Jim, is that it emphasizes the fact that this is not alchemy, that we are not magicians, that we are not this idea that sort of chefs and winemakers are these sort of demigods. By that I don't mean famous. I mean like whatever they're doing is sort of mystical and beyond our understanding, right? Like the old pagan priests or something like that. That's not who we are, right? We're just people who happen to be paying attention to this process and product for a long time. And in fact, I think we have a real responsibility to express as clearly and with humility the work that we do, so people can feel connected to it, and they do feel excited about being part of it, and they do decide to support small producers, not because they're famous and fancy and all of that, but because they feel connected to it. That is a one issue I have with the celebrity food and wine culture, a big one, which is I think it actually makes people feel further from the integrity of our products than closer.
I agree.
It's a good way to book restaurants, and it's a good way to charge $100 for a bottle of wine. It is not a good way to get people to really feel connected to land, to natural processes. And I think we'll mature through that in the United States. I think in Europe, it's obviously been much more part of the culture for a long time. It was part of our culture in the United States, I believe, but we lost it. I don't know, how. I wasn't here. But I think really what we're talking about is when we say that the wine is made in the vineyard, we do mean that. Like, we are part of that process, but it's not our brilliance or skill or charm that's important.
Right. It's interesting in filmmaking. There's a lot of things you can do with a camera to tell the story that you're trying to tell. But if the viewer is aware of the camera, if you're aware of that camera moving around, then that's not good. And what separates the amateurs from the great filmmakers, somebody that can do amazing things with the camera, but it's it's done in a way that you're never noticing that. You're just taking in the story, and the camera is telling you a story. And it seems like a good analogy for winemaking. If you're aware of tricks and stuff that's going on in the winery, then that's not good. But if it's just seamless and you're just enjoying a great glass of wine, then maybe the winemaker's done their job well.
You guys, we have a couple of minutes to end. Final note. Peter, we've known each other for a long time. I try to bring people I've known for a long time first because, we're 20, 25 years, when we opened César, right?
Yeah.
Crazy stuff. So hey, thank you so much. This is really cool. Wine is great, right? People can drink wine. It's okay, unless you drink too much, just like anything else. People talk about moderation. I say everything in moderation except moderation. I'm really against excess. It's really about the excess. I think moderation is kind of a weird name because it doesn't matter. So wine is great stuff. It's very healthy. If you drink too much, well, you're gonna get sick. It's like everything, So
the word I like better than moderation, which sounds like it's a bad thing. Or you're doing something that is balance. Balance.
Balance.
Right. And wine should be enjoyed. Alcohol is a wonderful thing, but your goal should not to get trashed. Your goal is to enjoy yourself.
And bring family, drink with someone.
Well, my dad's 93 years old, and he just drove to Tahoe today. So far, so good on the wine drinking front. There you go. My mom is 95, and she still has her glass of wine every day. She's yeah. She buys little half bottles now so that she doesn't.
My mom is 87, 85, and she still doesn't need glasses. She drinks right out of the bottle. Really?
All right.
Exactly.
You just better hope your mom's not listening to this.
Guys, it's so great to see you again. I can't wait to drink some beer at César soon.
Yeah, come by soon, and good luck with everything. And
thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you.
See you again soon.
All right.
Bye, guys. Bye, people. Thanks you, James.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Be safe.
Yep. Thank you.
We'll be back next Monday with more discussion.
I have Roy from
Imperial
Tico. So I don't know about next Monday, but soon.
Okay.
And anyway, so see you soon, guys. Thank you so much.
And Peter,